We put out all these chairs for you guys. You can't sit in back. Hey, you're here.
I totally forgot your name.
It's the real Jordan.
You're here today.
What?
I'll introduce myself.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Jordan.
Hi, Jordan.
I joined last semester, and I'll probably be one of the least active members.
Jordan's still awesome. I think he's awesome.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do think that. You said it, not me. I am known as the guy who brings Rock Band when he comes to game night.
Where were you?
That's probably what I'm best known for. And I really, really want to be a game developer. This is like not a curiosity type of thing. When you tell people, like, I want to make video games, I think there's a big impression that, like, you like playing video games and you haven't really, your head's kind of in the clouds and you're not really living in the real world where you actually have to do stuff and work. So to kind of give you an idea of how serious I am about game development, my mom found this a few days ago, and it's 19 or 20 years old, and it basically describes a war game. Here's the good guys, and here's the bad guys. The bad guys have a Death Star, and a battleship, and mega ties, and regular ties. And the good guys have mega ship. The mega ship is really cool. They have X-wings, cruisers spelled with no I, and U-ships, which, when I think about it, is probably Y-wings. I didn't know what those were called until I was like 15. And here's the description of their stats. They all have life. A is armor or attack. SH is probably shields. They've got P and SP, and presumably the good guys were supposed to win, but just barely. So I've been designing game systems since before I could write on a straight line without guides, before I was using lowercase letters on a regular basis. You know, so yeah, I'm really into this, and I always have been. So. Hi, that's me. I'm a comp sci major and
Preceptor sometimes.
Section leader.
yeah, I've been a section leader for
right.
comp sci. Yeah, and
You're still one.
I'm probably available a little bit for a project if somebody needs a programmer or something, but no promises because I'm real busy this semester. Okay.
Thank you. So cool. Who wasn't here last meeting either? Can you stand up and just say who you're? You can stand there.
Huh?
You can stand there and say, what's your name?
Oh,
what's your major?
I'm Tamara. I'm a computer science major. I'm a sophomore.
Cool. Anyone else? Lauren?
I'm Lauren. I'm a comp sci still pre-major for this semester, sophomore.
Yay.
Cool.
I'm Jordan. I'm a comp sci major. I'm a transfer student from Pima.
Weren't you here last meeting?
Yeah, but I didn't get to introduce myself.
Ah.
I felt the need to.
You were there too, but I don't remember you.
We
Okay.
have one more chair back there.
Yeah, we got one here too.
Yeah, there's plenty of chairs.
Yeah, there's a ton of chairs.
There's some space on the couch.
My name's Grant Newbold, and I'm an art major.
Yay.
Yeah, I thought. Yes.
Awesome.
I think we should keep a tally of the art people.
Just like it's like 50 programmers, and then like.
Okay. So I kind of want to go around the room and say everybody's name again, but we don't have time for that. So
Yeah, probably not.
just ask each other what your names are while I'm talking. So today we're gonna give 2 talks on the same thing. It's basically how to start your game projects. Like if you want to get involved in a game project. I'm gonna be talking more about the managing side of it, while Zooming will be talking more about like practical tips for your first project. This is Zooming, by the way. So, first of all, the club does not organize game projects specifically. Like, we do not come down from the top level and say, oh, okay, we're going to start a project. Everybody jump on board. We don't do that. If you want to start a project, it's totally up to you to start it. You can come to the club for help to like spread the word about it, find people who want to jump on board. And yeah, that's mainly how it works. And the best thing about that is that it's your project. You guide everything about it, and you learn a lot more skills that way, and you become more, what's the word? You're more attached to the project because it's your thing. It's not the club's project. So, okay. So my talk is basically broken up into several tips. The first chunk of tips is team stuff. The first thing that you should, so in terms of teams, I think this is my personal preference. I think it's always best to work in a team. If you think you can make a game all by yourself, that's really cool. Hello. But it's not as fun. Oh, should we close the door?
No, they just ended.
Okay, we're not being loud this time.
Close the door.
You can close it if we get loud.
The classes are done now.
Oh, really?
Oh, we can be loud now.
Okay, so when aiming for team size, teams are a big risk in your project, mainly because if you get a team that's too big, it will. You telling me to stand? No.
I wasn't pointing at you. I wasn't
Okay. So teams are generally, if you have a team that's too big, you will not be able to make as much progress on your game as you want. We have a famous story and running joke in this club about a project called Project Sponge. It had 9 people on it, and it lasted for what, 2 semesters? And they never even got a playable prototype working. What? Yeah. So the biggest reason why large teams don't do so well is because when you're on a large team, nobody really knows where their place on that team is. Like, you could give people titles and stuff, but at the end of the day, no one feels very accountable for for progress getting done. But if you're in a team of, say, 2 or 3 people, then everyone feels like, oh wow, I'm a whole third or I'm a whole half of this project. I better do my part or we will fail. But you also feel like you have much more room to make an impact on the project. Like, this is my project. I'm half of the team, or I'm a third of the team. And so generally when aiming for team size, 2 to 3 people is the best. Once you start to get up to 4 or more, you start having to worry about how to manage people, and you don't want to deal with that. Is that everything I have to say about team size? Yep. Now, another thing about team stuff is it's when working with your team, it's good to get close to your team members, literally. Like, it's a great practice is to just schedule time to meet up with your team members weekly, and even not just for meetings, but to schedule time to work next to them. There's so much communication that happens just by accident, that like you're just working on your thing and you tell your teammate of a crazy thing that happened while you're working, and the next thing you know, it turns out to be a useful thing of information to them. If you only communicate to your teammates in meetings or in emails, then you're going to really hurt yourself as a team. You're just not going to be able to move as efficiently, because then if you only communicate in emails and in meetings, that you might as well be working on your own and then meeting up with people occasionally. You're trying to create a good team. You could even meet up to do homework together. Another big thing is working. If you ever end up in a situation where you end up working remotely away from your team, like one summer, a bunch of us wanted to start a project, and we're like, oh, there's no time in the semester to start a project. Let's do it over the summer. We found that everybody disbanded over the summer because some of us went to, you went to China? Yep. And others went to like Italy or something. And then I went to Alaska. And then I went outside the country to the Dominican Republic. Yeah, it was crazy. And that's just not good. Like, now, whenever I'm getting involved in a team, I would like to avoid that situation at all costs. I do not want to work remotely. I would rather be in the same room with my team and work with them. Okay, next section. Every good project needs to be dead. No, you need deadlines. So, deadlines will keep your project from being dead, basically. The horrible thing about Project Sponge was that they did not have deadlines. They said, oh, we're just gonna finish it when it's done. And when you have a deadline, you have a clear marker of measuring how much progress you're making. You're saying, we have this many days left or this many weeks left. We have to make progress now. And it really stresses the fact that you have limited time. Like, even if you give yourself unlimited time, your time will still be limited because we're all students. So the project that we started that one summer, the thing that kept it alive was our clear deadline. We were making it for a competition, and that deadline was going to pass whether we were ready or not. But the deadline kept us moving forward, and it also encouraged us to revive the project when we got the chance. And it turned out into a pretty good project.
What was it?
It was Magnet Ball. So maybe we could show it later, but I don't have a projector up. But yeah, it was really fun. So some good deadline techniques: pick a deadline that you have no control over, like a competition deadline, or maybe like the end of the semester. Like, oh, if people are graduating, we have to finish by this date, or else we will never really meet up with that person again. That's a good deadline. A bad deadline is, let's pick this date because it feels good, and then if we don't make it, we can push it back, and then push it back. Kind of tying into deadlines, you just need a lot of time management skills to manage your project accordingly. And it doesn't mean you have to get like really crazy and with your time management. It just means that you have to really think about it seriously. You have to think about it as its own problem to solve when you're managing your project. You can't just say, oh, I'll just try harder to get my work done on time. A good technique is to just to be able to have the count of how many days left. That's already a good step. And it's also good to be able to look back at your progress to see, okay, we made this much progress in this amount of time, and make predictions based on that. I think we're going to make this much progress in this amount of time, or maybe longer, judging on the past. And then you can plan accordingly to that. You can even realize that your current plan is not going to finish on time and change your plan. A few tips to finding more time to work on a project is to take fewer classes. So if you're taking 19 credits, that's not good for a game project. I know when we worked on Magnet Ball, I went as low as 11 credits, and then I made it up for in the winter. But yeah, that was crazy. What I really love to do though is to sign up for independent studies to get an excuse to work on my project for credit. If you can pass off your project as research, or if you're an honors student and you have to do an honors thesis, you can maybe set up a game project for your honors thesis. I love doing that. I did like, how many? 5 independent studies to work on projects. It feels like I'm cheating the system. For me personally, when I'm managing my time, I have a time log that I keep on my computer. It's basically a spreadsheet of what I'm doing at what time and how much time I'm spending on it. And I don't really do anything other than that. Like, I should be doing analytics on my time log, but I don't. But I just know that keeping track of my time, writing down what I'm doing, that makes me already more conscious of how I'm spending my time. And I can look back immediately to say, wow, I spent an hour on this. I was not very productive. And it can tell me to get focused and to be serious about what I'm doing so that I don't have to stay up all night. Another cool technique, the last technique that I want to mention about time, is when you're working with your teams, it's a great idea to schedule fake classes into your schedule so that you can basically reserve a block of time during your day to say, I'm going to work on this game project no matter what at this time. And that's a great excuse to meet up with your teammates and work on stuff together. We actually did that for our current project, Zuoming and I, except last week we didn't work on a game project. We did homework instead because we were behind. Oh, I forgot another tip. So another good tip for time management is to live on campus. Living on campus saves you a lot of time. and you can get a ton of work done. This semester I'm living off campus, and I'm like, man, this is taking up a lot of time. I've even measured it too. It's statistically proven that living off campus takes up your time. So, scope. This is like section 3. Can you read that?
Yeah, yes.
The C is on top of the S and the P is weird. So, scope is a fancy piece of jargon. It's basically referring to how big your project is. So, when you hear somebody say, "Oh, your scope is too big," it means you're too ambitious. Your project is going to take too much time and too much money. So you need to shrink your scope, come up with a different idea, or change your idea to be a smaller project. So when a lot of you, when you start your first game projects, you're going to think of this crazy, massive idea, and you're going to be like, "This game is going to be so awesome. Let's do it." And then you quickly realize that it's going to take you 3 or 4 years to make that idea happen, especially with the little amount of time that you have as students. And actually, my first game project was a really ambitious idea, and I kept working on it for like 3 or 4 years before giving up on it. And it's not good. my time would have been better spent working on several smaller projects and working my way up from there. So when you start your first game project, you should think very small. Like, can I even make a first level? That's a good first project. Just focusing on making something that's actually playable as opposed to spending your time working on a back end for a game that people can't even play, that you can't even show a demo of. So in the first year that this club was running, we actually held a competition. And I remember when I joined, I joined a team of 3 people, and we had this idea to make this crazy project. It was gonna be like this really massive scoped game, and so the point of the competition was to make a game in 3 weeks, and the whole point of that was to limit our scope. And yet here we were planning our game for this 3-week game, and we're like we wanted to put in networked gameplay so that you can play multiplayer on multiple computers. And we also wanted like a randomly generated map, and we wanted the map to have at least 9 rooms that were handcrafted by us or something. It was just horrible. And then we started making it, and it wasn't until the last week, the last of the 3 weeks that we had, that we actually decided to change our game idea. And what we did was we salvaged it. We created a game based off of what we built already. And we made this, so the game is called Orange You Blue, if some of you remember that. It was a pun, because it was a 2-player game with an orange guy and a blue guy. And it was actually pretty creative for what it was. And that's a pretty good example of how shrinking your scope to meet your deadlines, and why deadlines are good too. It's a good example of how that will help you. So there are a few things that you can avoid if you want to keep your scope small. One good thing is don't put networking in there, like network multiplayer. That's just a huge scope feature. Another thing you could do is limit yourself to 2D games, especially if you don't have experience into 3D. You also probably want to avoid tools that you are not familiar with, because learning a tool and getting used to it is a project in its own, sort of. Or it will at least increase the risk in your project, because you don't know what you can do with that tool. So if you do want to learn a new tool and you want to use a project as an excuse to really get to know the tool, consider that when considering the size of your scope. Games that require you to make a lot of content for them, that's a really big scope feature. Like if you're making a platformer with 100 levels, you're better off making a platformer with 1 level that you can play over and over again. So most of the games that I've made are the kind that you can play over and over again, just because of how much less content we have to create for that game. Games that require skills that you don't have, they will increase your scope. Like if you want to make a game that's really based on animation, but nobody on your team knows how to animate, That's actually pretty scary. Or if you want to do something like with a tool that you're not sure about, or stuff like that. Deadlines. Deadlines are another thing that will keep your scope small, just by sheer necessity. That's the next thing I have. Okay, so I don't really have a title for this last section. I guess it's adapt, maybe. So I basically, in the last few points, I tried to mention a lot of problems that you could run into while working on your game project, but you're not going to avoid them all. You're definitely going to run into some problem, and you need to be able to adapt to them. Kind of like what we did in Magnet Ball. We had a giant team, and we were spread out far apart, and so the way we handled that was we waited until school started again, and then we revived the project, and we started it from scratch. We threw away everything we worked on for those past 2 or 3 months, which took a lot of guts to do, especially since the deadline was only like 2 months away, a little more than 2 months. Yeah. So, but it's the best thing that you can do is expect to run into problems, expect to fail basically, and to be ready to learn from them. And that's actually my favorite way of learning, to just try something and watch what happens and then learn from that. I just think it's more fun to learn that way because you can get really reckless. You're like, oh, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'll do it anyway and see what happens. And the lessons that you learn by doing that will actually teach you those lessons much more effectively than if you read it in a book or something. But yeah, project management, this is basically project management, adapting to problems and being able to figure out how to fix them. But the good thing is that if you're making a game in this club, you have all these people to consult on how to fix your game project and how to get it back on track. I have enough time, so I'm gonna move on to, so a lot of this was general background advice. And the next thing I want to touch on is process. Like, how exactly would you go about creating your game? And this is just going to be a little brief overview. It's actually a much deeper topic. But so say you first start making your game, you get people on board your team. Now what? Well, first you need to figure out what you're going to make. And I think that's obvious. But I think a lot of times when you're starting a project, especially if you have a really tight deadline, you'll be very compelled to just start making something, even if you don't know what that something is. That's actually a very hard impulse to ignore. But it's good to know what you're making, and the way you go about doing that is to just brainstorm, come up with ideas. But then you hit another roadblock, which is, how do I measure which ideas are the best as opposed to which ones are not good? How do I pick an idea from the many of ideas that we had? And we actually ran into this problem while working on Magnet Ball. We would spend hours on whiteboards coming up with all these ideas, but we were so indecisive about which idea we should move forward with. And so when we revived the project, we didn't use whiteboards at all. we came up with an idea and then we decided to build it right away. So basically, we made the assertion that the only way to test the quality of an idea is to actually make it and then see what happens. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Just try something and see what happens and learn from it. And so we basically use some techniques called rapid prototyping, where we built prototypes of these ideas. They're fully playable prototypes of radically different ideas over a very short period of time. And then at the end of that prototyping session, we were able to look at all the things that we made and say, this game is clearly the most fun of them all. We actually played it, so we know it's the most fun of them all. And that was just much nicer. Then after that, once you figure out what you're making, you can go into production. So these are some fancy terms. So pre-production is what I like to call the phase where you're making a lot of prototypes and you're trying to figure out what you're making. Once you made the decision to follow through with a certain idea for your entire project, that's when I tend to think of as production, when you're actually making what your idea is. And yeah, production is basically you making the project, and it can be very different depending on what kind of games you're making. It can involve more prototypes, like if you're testing certain problems with your idea, to say, there are these problems, how can we solve it? You may not know how to solve it, so make prototypes of it. Try something and see what happens. That's basically the game design process in general, really. But what I was saying about making multiple prototypes to figure out your idea, that's pretty advanced stuff. Like when you start making your first game, you're gonna struggle to just make your first prototype. And so when you're starting your first project, you should think of perhaps design your first project, like set the scope of your first project to be, let's make one prototype and see if we can do that. Then after that, you can get more ambitious. Let's see if we can make 2 prototypes. Let's see if we can turn one of those prototypes into a full-length game. Yeah, that's the entirety of my talk.
Yay.
Yay. Any questions or comments?
Can I like add something onto it?
Yes.
Here? I'm gonna come up front here, just on the front camera. But
He's
yes, I'm on the camera.
We get to see him now.
What's your name?
Yeah, so I'm Patrick, so I'm the cinematographer. I'm usually behind the camera. Anyway,
Yep.
just as a general tip too, when you're like working on a game project, I know Livio kind of touched about this with the adaptability and stuff like that, but like generally, like when you're designing a game, you should be kind of prepared to realize that every one of your ideas that you thought was fun about your game could be completely wrong.
Yep.
Because you can go out and like have someone play your game and they're like, oh, well, I enjoyed this element of your game, and I could totally take you off by complete surprise and stuff like that. And I've had that happen numerous times.
Yeah, and that it's a lot easier to fall into that trap if you're working on a very big scoped project. It's very easy to romanticize your own idea and to say, wow, this idea is so great, it's going to be awesome, and to keep telling yourself that over the course of the several months that you're spending on that huge project. But with the idea of making rapid prototypes and to say, I'm not even going to judge this idea until I try it out, that really gets you, it really makes you grounded in reality, and to say, is this idea actually fun, or am I just telling stories to myself?
So, short stories of this whole thing, playtest early, because then it's a lot easier to revamp your game early on than it is a lot later. So.
Yeah. Zoom and go. Okay. I'll move the TV.
So I have no idea where the projector went, and I just opened
in a
this.
corner or something.
Oh, I know where it is.
Do you want it?
Does it really matter though if I can use the TV? Does it really matter though if I can use the TV?
I mean, no.
Use the TV.
Do whatever you want.
Wait. Let me give you the mic.
Still kind of far away.
I'm stand behind the TV.
Oh no.
Isn't there an HDMI cord that you can use instead?
Yeah.
I can talk yes if I'm.
Is there one in the room?
Do you have
We-
any?
It's probably over there.
We looked
Okay.
for a long time last time.
Alright.
Unless they recently acquired.
You can put it over the trash can.
Let's plug into the road here.
Your computer.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I did that one.
You probably won't fall on it. No, it won't.
Why don't you put on the mic while I think?
This is pretty complicated stuff. It is. I'm not actually joking. Like, oops. Wait, so how many people here have already made a game, like, before?
How crappy?
As scrappy as you want.
As scrappy as you want, yeah.
Dude,
Does blackjack count?
Sure.
Yeah.
You made blackjack?
I
Was it for
remade
CS?
blackjack.
You remade
I just
blackjack.
remade it. Even
Nice.
though it already exists, but
That's cool.
Awesome. Spare the most. Wait, so that was like definitely more than half of you guys. So I might like make this a little bit more specific. What?
It was really fun to make, but it wasn't good.
Wait, did you make it during the game jam? Or?
No, I made it on my own using Construct 2, and my friend made up a bunch of these little gifs of like my friend being a derp, and it's like, this is a crab, and this is another crab, and if you shoot this crab, both of them will die, but if you shoot this one, nothing will happen. And there are like a bunch of random AIs just floating around.
Is this supposed to be symbolic?
With no hints.
I'm thinking it's AV. Could be wrong. No, it's not. That is totally wrong. Let's try not menu.
Yeah, it's like in the middle and just like spinning slowly.
It was a postmodern deconstruction of commands in video.
Yay!
I can make it talk.
Be careful not to. Yeah.
I can't type. It's impossible.
Okay. Guess I'm supposed to
You
put
should
this in my
have
pocket.
For real, the end of the title.
For real?
Truly making the game for real.
That makes sense. It's in the spirit of this talk, I think. Okay. Can you guys see it well? You, can you see it?
Oh, I can't.
Okay. Alright, so basically how this meeting went is Livio said he'll give a talk, and I'm like, okay, I'll give a talk too. We'll just each give a 30-minute talk. It'll be fine. And then we ended up kind of wanting to talk about the same thing without realizing it. But I think we still have, well, we may share some of the same views, but the specific parts we go into are a little bit different. And I wanted this talk to focus specifically on going from talking about making a game into actually making a game, because one thing I see is that people really like to discuss about games. They like to when they play a game, they're like, oh, you'll be better if you had a better combat system, if they add in like tradable skills or whatever thing they can think of. But when it actually comes to implementing it, it's a very different story. So this is kind of a intro, like making your first game in addition to the general process of how you would go about implementing something. And I have a quote here that I think is extremely relevant. It's from The Art of Game Design by Jesse Shaw, which is a really, really awesome book. And if you're at all interested in game design, definitely read it. It talks about everything I talk about, but it goes in much more detail. The quote itself says that your first 10 games will suck, so get them out of the way fast. And having personally made like close to 10 games, depending on how you count games, I think it's very true that your first n amount of games will suck, because making games isn't like all that intuitive. There's a lot of skills that goes into it. For example, design. You have to figure out how the graphics and the sound mesh. You have to figure out style. You have to figure out teamwork. All that good stuff. It doesn't come the first time or the second time or the third time. For you, it might come the fourth time, but for me, I think it might even take more than 10. It's just how things are when you go with game design. Next. So why make a game? For a lot of you, like, I don't really even have to ask this question, because making games is just inherently such a cool thing. Like, if you were a game designer and people ask you about your occupation, you're like, oh, hey, I'm a game designer. They'll be like, oh, that's so cool. What games have you made? And all that stuff. And I'll download your apps right now, right? It's like just such a cool occupation inherently. But if you need more convincing, I think experience, Livio also touched on it a little bit. You get a ton of experience out of making games, and it's not really just the experience of making games, it's also the experience of working in a team, crafting whatever asset, like 3D models or graphics, or making the music, or finding a sound effect. It's a lot of problem solving, it's a lot of doing your own research and finding out how to make like an object move on the screen, for example. Also a lot of programming and project management all comes from that. So it's really something that can improve you as a whole person. It's also incredibly challenging, And that's the part of the reason I do it, because I think it's one of the most difficult things you can be doing, because it merges like most elements of the film in addition to the interactivity, which is like that much more complex. And I think it provides a very good challenge if you just want to take on something that's very difficult. If you're serious about getting into the game industry, it's very important to have a portfolio. Like, you get a degree in game design, it's not really all that much if you don't have a portfolio. And the companies would really like to see you have a portfolio, because it tells them that you spend a lot of time outside of your class making games too, and that's what they really want, as opposed to, oh, I made these few tiny games for like my class, and this is all I have to show you guys. And there isn't creative joy that comes with, I mean, making any artistic item, but I think making a game especially, because you get to create a world, and how many people can actually say that they got to create like complete world out of nothing? You can interact with it, you can like talk to people in it, you can throw a Pokeball and Pokemon will come out. Like, not many people can say that. And mandatory can't defeat Airman reference. Anyone? Okay. Cool YouTube video, but
Airman Guitar Tonight. Airman Guitar Tonight.
The original Japanese version.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not the exact reason I put it. The exact reason I put it is because, like, Mega Man was one of the first games I played, and when I first played it, I always like imagine what would my own boss look like. And I think that comes with a creative joy. Like, you inherently want to create something. If you see something fun, you're like, I want to make something that's like this, but it's different, so I don't have to play the same boss each time. And the boss will be even more awesome than Capcom's. So I divide those into levels. You can treat it as steps, but I also want to make this faster, so I'm going to skip most of these. But the most important one I want to point out, and Livio already mentioned it, but I want to emphasize again, is what scope do I have? Because when you're making a game, the word scope is going to like constantly pop out at you. It'll just like poke you in the back, and you will not be able to throw it out of your head, because you will not have unlimited scope. These two things, what skills can I bring into it and what skills can I learn from it? Usually, like, I find it good to keep in mind, but it's not something that I have to consciously think of. You might just know, like, prior what you're gonna bring into it. What skills do you have to bring into a game project? And that's totally fine. So brainstorming, Livio also mentioned that, but first of all, I think a lot of you probably already have like some kind of game idea already, because I've talked to people who are interested in game design, and they're like, oh, I already have this idea, and it's like a super awesome world. And it's good that you have an idea. If you don't have one though, I find that a good way to find a first game idea is to think about the games that you really love. Like, if I talk to people who haven't thought about their first game project, and I ask like, what's your ideal game? They would think of something that's pretty much similar to what they have played in the last 3 days. So, like, my FPS friend would just be like, well, actually my FPS/horror friend would be like, what if you made like Amnesia, except, well, not Amnesia, but it's kind of like a mix between Slender and Amnesia, except your enemy can also time travel, so it's like even scarier. It's just
kind of cool.
It's kind of cool. Like, your first ideas are usually pretty cool, I think. And that's perfect. Like, that's somewhere you can start. There's also other things you can ask yourself, like, what kind of game do I want to see out there? What kind of game do I want to play? If not be creative, it's really just tapping into the creative process. Different people have their own creative process.
I have a suggestion for that.
Oh, cool.
So, for getting something really small scope that you can actually play, a great thing to do is mod an existing game.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want an idea, you look at the games you really like, you say, can I mod any of these? Are there nice tools available that I think I can learn? And then say, well, what would make this game even better? And can I make that? And so you can just make a very small tweak, and that will be very small in scope. And
that's,
you know, we've all played games where we thought, oh man, this game would be so much better if you just had that one extra thing in it. And so that's a really easy way to get ideas for a project.
you can also get pretty good community feedback if you mod, as opposed to just uploading a random game that maybe doesn't have like a strong fan base already. But yeah, the other part about being creative is thinking about things you like to do. For example, like skiing, snowboarding, any kind of sports are a good place to start for possible game ideas. Or like, I don't know, your favorite artist, your favorite music might also be a good place. I actually use music quite a bit for inspiration. If not, you can always find a team, and chances are that someone out there, and I think it's pretty likely if you're like looking in the club, someone out there will already have an idea. And as I said, people's first ideas are usually pretty cool, so you can always just be like, hey, do you have an idea, game you're interested in making? And they answer and you're like, oh hey, that's pretty cool, maybe I'll join you. Alternatively, you can ask John Cleese. He is one of the members behind Monty Python. And he gave a lecture on creativity, which I found to be pretty helpful. I'll show you the first minute, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Yes. Did it? No, where's my mouse? Okay. Just gonna play the first minute. Full screen that.
Other thing that I can say about creativity, there are certain conditions which more likely
is it possible?
TV isn't getting
and
sound.
that something creative will
Right, it's only VGA. Forgot about that. Should I use HDMI?
Oh no, I don't know it's German.
You need 5 things. 1, space. 2, time. 3, time. 4, confidence. And 5, a 23 waste. Sorry, my mind was wandering. Getting into the open mode too quickly. 7, 23 waste with humor. Okay, let's fix.
Right. So that's that. This is like a shorter version.
So he said you need
Right.
time, you need space.
Space.
You need time.
Right. Yeah.
You need humor, confidence.
And then you need humor. Or 22-inch words. Yeah. So this 13-minute version is kind of like a condensed keynote part of it, but
We don't really have time.
yeah, we don't. You can find a full version on YouTube, and it's really awesome and funny.
Can we
So.
access the PowerPoint on D2L?
All right, let's go back. But yeah, very good tips for getting creative. Risk assessment, that's something that Livio kind of made references to, but he didn't talk about it directly and using the word risk. Well, he used it once in a very quiet voice. So risk is where your games will go to die most often. And that's because with something as big as a game, you're inherently going to have lots and lots of risks. The biggest one is likely 2D versus 3D, because I think most people, when they think of their first game project, they're like, oh, hey, I'll make a 3D, like fully habitable planet where you can just go anywhere and it's like fully sandbox. And it's completely network MMORPG where you can use real money, whatever. But everything else aside, like network aside, 3D, like making a 3D game requires you to invest so much more time into the project that you really, 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 really want to consider if you really have time to make a 3D game. And often game ideas rely on the game world being in 3D. So you rely on the world being on 3D. So what's it going to say? if 3D fails, if it fails the 3D not have time for a test, then the game idea fails and you go back to the drawing board. How plausible is the idea? This is mainly how, like, if people are actually going to enjoy your game idea. If you make a game about time traveling assassins, it's probably a pretty plausible idea in terms of being popular. But if you make like a clown simulator, that's not very useful. And even if you finish making it, I don't think people enjoy it. You can play it for yourself. A clown simulator?
Livio's gonna steal your idea.
I wouldn't mind if you steal that idea. I just came up with that. And time and money. And for college student, mostly time. But it loosely translates. It loosely translates. Too poor.
Well, time equals money, so.
Amen.
Right. So this ties back to the scope, because time and money is a part of your scope, or they are your scope, I should say. It's kind of misleading that I put this as a single step, because risk assessment should happen at every step in your game development process. There's just like, at any step in a game, whether you're polishing it or making a prototype, or you're just thinking of ideas, risks constantly come in. For example, if you don't know whether you want to make a realistic physics-based jump or a cartoony, very player-controllable jump in your action platform game, and then you make your game, and you said, I'm going to decide this later, you make your game, and then you finish like half of it, and then you finally come to a point where it's like, oh guys, we got to figure this out, like, which type of jump do we want? And if it turns out that the jump that is better isn't the one you already implemented, then you have to go back and redesign all the puzzles you figured out. You have to move the platforms over, and it screws up the space, and everything just goes around. You have to backtrack a lot. So when you have a question in a process that kind of demands an answer, don't say, oh, I'll just figure it out when I come to it, because that's a recipe for backtracking.
So can I add to that?
Yeah.
So the term risk assessment is kind of like another piece of jargon, but it's like what Zuoming said. It becomes a way of thinking after a while. Like, you don't even think about risk assessment when you're assessing your risks. you just do it naturally because it's the most rational way to do things. If you can also look at my talk. So in my talk, I just listed a bunch of risks basically. So my talk was basically a big risk assessment of starting a game project in a way.
Cool. Gonna go slightly faster. And all of those before are pretty theoretical, but starting the slide, you'll get pretty useful. So gathering resources, this means getting the actual workforce / tools / asset creation workflow to start making your game. So first, obviously, you want to determine which platform, because platform decides which tools you'll be using. If you want to make a smartphone game, C++ isn't the best option, and there's reasons, there's history behind that. If you want to make a smartphone game, then it's probably best to use one of the development kits provided by whatever phone software OS creator or one of the libraries existing. Once you determine your platform, you want to ask, are you going to use rapid prototyping tools, frameworks, or languages? In my opinion, if you're making your first game or even second game, you should definitely use rapid prototyping tools.
What are those?
Right. What are those? You probably heard of most of them. The ones I can think of top of my head are Unity, GameMaker, GameSalad, Stencil, and Construct. So these are examples. They're basically tools made by people who have experience in creating graphics engines or audio engines, specifically to have a rich set of features to help you make a game very fast.
And a lot of them you don't even need programming.
Right, a lot of them you don't even need programming, although programming is always useful to bring to it. And since all of us are CS majors, it should make it a lot easier. I know. Frameworks are similar to that. Basically, they're kind of like pre-written audio engines or graphic engines or physics engines that you can just borrow. But the code to link them together, you have to program on your own. This summer I tried using frameworks, and it takes a deceptively long time to use. So if you're doing your first project, it probably is better to not use a framework because you'll be bogged down by actually having to code and debug your own code, as opposed to getting right to how the objects in the game interact. Languages, programming languages, obviously, but you just shouldn't use them. Like, unless you plan on writing your own game engine, which Tyler says,
did it. He's awesome.
which is very, very, very not recommended because they'll probably take.
It's very not recommended.
It's very not recommended.
If you want to make your own game engine, do it because you want to make your own game engine, not because you ever want to make a game with it.
That. All of my that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be fair to say it will take at least 3 to 6 months to like get something basic going.
That's if you already know what you're doing.
Right.
Basically, it'll take like 2.5 years.
Right, if you know what you're doing. So don't go here unless I don't even know for what reason. Like, unless you're writing like a fully commercial game that you know will be distributed on a console or something. Obtaining assets, there's different ways. You have, well, I'll explain this later. There is the option of using existing assets, which is not very professional, but it's good in a way that you can get quality things pretty fast. And you can use it to see how your game could look like if you had some polish to it. Right, but I think it's better not to upload them just to make yourself look more professional, but whatever. Yeah, if it's just a prototype, it really depends on your views. Yeah. There's obviously making them yourselves, which requires basically a team, unless you can make the graphics and the sound by yourself. And if you can do that, kudos to you, but if you can't, you need a team, and that's a whole other mess that I'll get into.
What is that graphic?
That graphic?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to talk about it. So this is like the godsend for like sound generation for rapid prototyping. Basically, it's a tool you can use to generate random 8-bit sound effects. And the good thing about randomly generating them is you don't have to assume like any liability for it, and it provides a lot of parameters you can tweak to make your sound more ideal. So, for example, I like explosions, so explosion. Right, so if I want to make the sound longer, any of attack time, sustain time, decay time can make it longer. Kind of technical terms, but if I just experimentally increase this and not press my right button. They have other parameters: being hit, jumping, pick up coins. You can just do this all day. Meeting over, just press. And you can export it as a WAV file, which is basically the most convenient format for your sound files to be in. So use this whenever you can if you find the sounds to be appropriate. Even if you don't, you can just use it as a placeholder. Set aside your time. Livio talked about that. Prototyping, Livio also talked about that. I grabbed like a horrible quote from Wikipedia, like the person who wrote this didn't know how to write English. Let me just read it. A prototype is an early sample, model, or release of a product built to test a concept or a process, or to act as a thing to be replicated or learned from. So yeah, it doesn't make sense. But yeah, but they use some pretty cool words that I will use to explain it. So just going to go over these really fast. It's a sample slash model slash release because it's something that should be able to stand on its own. In the context of a game that's a playable prototype, it's something that you can actually go in and interact, and the objects in it won't just completely ignore you. It's something you use to test slash process slash act. Basically, what Livio explained, you can use it to test ideas, test risks. For example, the 2 jumps, you wouldn't know intuitively, unless you're a genius, which jump is better. So you want to put them in a game. Well, you want to put them in a prototype to test it right away, as opposed to testing it halfway. Save you whatever amount of time that is between how long it will take you to prototype and how long would it take you to realize you would actually need to decide on a jump. It's something to be replicated or learned from. One of the great things about prototyping is that it gives you an excuse to write crappy code. You can just write totally dumb code because you don't really need to understand it again. It's just a prototype. You use it, you figure out what to do, and then you replicate it with better written code for your actual game and learn from. We covered that. And the most important point is being early, and I kind of covered that. Rapid prototyping, the point is to be early. The point is to save you time by doing it. Time is a commodity.
The learning thing applies to art assets as well. So when you're actually working with the prototype, you might find out that a certain style that you sketch out really quickly won't work because it's too busy and it's not conveying the proper information. So it can give you a lot of feedback about what is visually important and what needs to be emphasized in a more final set of art assets.
Right. You can do there's many types of prototype. There's the polished prototype where you test audio and visuals. There's also technical prototypes where you test if something you want to do is actually feasible. For example, like setting up networking probably requires some kind of technical prototype. Next. Yeah, I'm almost done, guys. So endgame, congregate. So you might be surprised that I didn't cover the polish element, and the reason is I'm too lazy. No, the reason is most games end with a prototype. Not many game ideas actually survive to being completely polished. There's just not enough time, or the idea isn't good enough. So often you want to just make a prototype and keep making them until you're satisfied with it, and either release it or archive it or do both. And you can pull the prototypes out later to polish it, given the time, the desire to. And this will also save you time to work on more quality games. For your first game, though, your prototype might actually be the finished product. So just do what you want with it, polish it if it makes you feel proud. And it should make you feel proud if you finish a game. And the final thing, a good practice is to write a retrospective on your game after you're done. As I said, there's a ton of experience to be gained from making a game. And it's good to keep track of it and what went wrong in the process, because seriously, it's so much experience that you probably won't even remember a lot of it unless you spent the effort to try to remember it just for the act of writing it down.
Yeah, so on that, there's a lot of insights that I've gained by just doing retrospectives on my own projects. So in the industry, there's this idea of a post-mortem, which is a paper that you write about your project after it's over. And I've written some on my project, and in the process of writing them, I made a lot of realizations that I would not have made if I was not doing that.
Right. And you should definitely read postmortems for games that you like, because they contain some very interesting facts. The stuff I know about Pokemon, buried in postmortem. Teaming up, I'm just gonna skip that because Livio did it. Well, yeah, just be careful when you team up. Well, be careful is not the word, but be aware of when you team up, because you can team up before you make your first prototype. You can team up before you even had a brainstorm idea, or you can team up during the polish. part. There's different responsibilities, different timelines that comes with having a team at different times, and you kind of do need to know what you're doing if you're assembling a team, because it's very easy to fail if you don't craft a good team experience. And I think Patrick's telling me to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I'm telling you to wrap up.
Yeah, this is like last slide. No, don't be
Maybe
project
last slide
sponge.
you have.
Oh, yeah, never mind, that's not last slide. So this will be very fast. What to do, like all that jumbo, where do you start? Brainstorm, learn a prototyping tool, like you should definitely learn one because it's just very useful. Even if you're not a programmer, it doesn't require much programming skill to learn, and you get very much power by having the ability to make something simple by yourself. Level up your skills. If you go in a team especially, you need to bring some solid skills other than being funny and diplomatic. And during game creating events, this is not a shameless plug about Game Jam, but Game Jams are very useful because they force you to do that entire long process in 2 days / 48 hours, and you get to learn a significant fraction of what you would learn in a long-term project. So there isn't just the Club Game Jam, there's also Global Game Jam that's going to be next January, and they have thousands of teams that participate and make games for that. And there's also Ludum Dare, which is also 48 hours, and I think the really main difference is that you're supposed to release your own source code afterward. But finding someone to team up with and then just like go into one of these projects expecting to make something, you'll probably gain some very awesome experience, have a good bonding experience, you make a good game, you learn a ton from it, and it's all good, and you go back and sleep over because you're awake for like 60 hours. Not really. That's it. Oh.